Have you ever tried not to be anxious and found that it only made the anxiety worse? What if you have the ability to exaggerate your symptoms? Wouldn't that mean you have more control over the anxiety than you think you do? Welcome back to Quieting Anxiety, a podcast from Excel at Life. I'm Dr. Monica Frank, and today we're going to explore a counterintuitive CBT method known as paradoxical intention, or as I often call it, exaggerate the fear. It's a technique that can help you face anxiety head on, not by avoiding it, but by actively amplifying the very sensations and thoughts you fear the most. I know that sounds strange at first, but stay with me. Let's start with a grounding exercise you can use if your anxiety spikes higher than you planned during an exposure. Focus around you. Name 3 things you can see. It can be the wall, the light, another person. Now touch 3 things and notice the texture. It can be your phone, an item of clothing you have on, the chair you're sitting on. Now listen and identify 3 things you hear. It can be the sound of my voice, the hum of a refrigerator or furnace, outside activity. Take a breath now. Relax your shoulders and allow yourself to focus on this episode. Today we will explore how the paradox of exaggerating fear can help relieve anxiety. I know I will seem like a broken record if you're listening to these episodes about exposures, but before we begin, paradoxical intention can be an intense form of exposure, and so can bring up strong anxiety, sometimes more than expected. It's important to work with a qualified mental health professional who can guide and pace the process safely. What I share here is for understanding and reflection, not a substitute for individualized treatment. A paradox is something that seems illogical on the surface, but reveals a deeper truth. With anxiety disorders, the goal often feels obvious. Get rid of the anxiety. So it might seem strange, even foolish, to deliberately create it. But paradoxical intention works because it breaks the cycle of resistance. It challenges the fear that fuels anxiety by saying, "So what if I feel anxious?" As you know from listening to this podcast, in CBT, our goal is not to eliminate anxiety entirely. It's to change your relationship with it, to make it tolerable, manageable, to show your brain that anxiety, while uncomfortable, isn't dangerous. And sometimes the best way to do that is to exaggerate the fear until it loses its power. Let me share an example from my practice. I once worked with a man who feared having a panic attack on a plane. We did a lot of preparation using imaginal exposure, coping strategies, and education. But before his practice flight to Chicago, I gave him an unexpected assignment. Your goal is to experience anxiety. Let it happen. Feel it fully. Ask the flight attendant for help if needed. No fixing, just experience. However, on your way home from Chicago, I want you to use the skills you have learned. When he returned, he told me, "I really tried to be anxious, but I just couldn't." He had prepared so thoroughly, so mindfully, so willingly, that the anxiety had nothing to hook into. That's the paradox in action. Technically, that's not quite what I intended. I wanted him to learn that he could have anxiety while flying and be able to cope with it. However, we'll take progress in whatever form that it comes. By choosing to experience anxiety on purpose, he learned he could tolerate it, and in doing so, diffused its power. Let me explain how paradoxical intention works. Primarily, it teaches 3 core lessons. The first is that you can tolerate anxiety. When you choose it willingly, you stop fearing it. The second lesson is interesting. It is the idea that you have control. You might disagree strongly about this, but think about it. If you can deliberately create and intensify anxious symptoms, you are controlling them. So this method teaches you that you have more control than you might believe. It changes your thought process about anxiety. Finally, for most people, it is the fear of anxiety, not the symptoms themselves, that causes the most suffering. When people get to the point where they can truly say, okay, bring it on, the anxiety loses its control. But to benefit from this method, you must approach it genuinely. You can't secretly hope to fail at creating anxiety. You need to really try to believe the anxiety will come and to accept that you can handle it if it does. You might be wondering, how is this technique different from other exposure strategies we've talked about? Well, what makes paradoxical intention unique is the intentional effort to exaggerate the feared outcome on purpose. In most forms of exposure, you confront a feared situation so your anxiety can gradually decrease. For example, you give a speech to reduce your fear of public speaking, or you let your heart race during exercise to learn it's not dangerous. But paradoxical intention flips that idea around. Instead of calming down or easing into the situation, you're saying, let's see if I can make this worse. You're not just confronting the anxiety, you're trying to amplify it. That might sound a little wild, but here's why it works. With paradoxical intention, you're not just tolerating discomfort, you're provoking it. You're mockingly inviting the fear to do its worst. That might mean intentionally thinking the most absurd, catastrophic thought, or deliberately trying to blush or shake or stumble over your words. This isn't about making a mistake or sitting with symptoms. It's about leaning into the fear with full dramatic flair. Paradoxical intention uses irony as a therapeutic tool. If you're trying to have a panic attack or trying to make yourself anxious, your brain can't interpret the situation the same way. It scrambles the usual feedback loop. You're no longer the victim of anxiety, you're now its director. And the irony of inviting what you fear actually disarms the fear itself. So instead of, oh no, what if I blush? You say, let's see how red I can turn. Let's see if I can get other people to notice and comment. It's counterintuitive, but that dissonance breaks the spell that fear has over you. Paradoxical intention is especially useful when the problem isn't the situation, but the anticipation of how you'll feel in that situation. It's helpful for panic disorder, public speaking anxiety, certain types of OCD, anytime the fear is about the experience of anxiety itself. For example, if your biggest fear is blushing or having a thought you can't control or losing control during a meeting, paradoxical intention teaches you, if I can choose to have this fear, maybe it doesn't control me. One last thing, it's important to approach this technique with the right mindset. You can't use paradoxical intention as a trick to get rid of anxiety. It's not, I'll try to panic so I don't panic. It has to be sincere. You're saying, so what if I panic? So what if people notice? I'm willing to feel it and I'll survive it. That takes a higher level of insight and readiness, So this certainly isn't usually a starting technique. And it's not for everyone. But when you're prepared for it, paradoxical intention can be a surprising and even liberating way to experience your anxiety differently and reclaim your sense of choice. So, how can you practice paradoxical intention? Start with a situation or symptom that tends to trigger your anxiety. For example, a racing heart, shaky hands, thoughts like I'll go crazy or they'll think I'm weird. Then deliberately exaggerate it. If you feel your heart racing, run in place until your heart pounds. Then sit quietly and observe the sensations. If you fear dizziness, spin in a circle a few times and stand still. If you fear judgment for saying something weird, say something silly on purpose, like, I forget what I was saying, my brain just wandered to cheese. Or if you fear someone noticing your anxiety, deliberately make your hands shake or some other symptom. The key is to stay present with the feeling and to say to yourself, this is just anxiety. I can allow it. I don't need to fix it. Track your anxiety level before, during, and after. And if it spikes too high, use grounding thoughts like, this feels intense, but I felt it before and I'm okay. I'm choosing this feeling right now. The more I accept anxiety, the less it controls me. When you use paradoxical intention, you're not only exposing yourself to fear, you're reframing it. Instead of saying, I can't handle this, you're saying, let's see what happens if I stop running from it. You replace avoidance with curiosity. And that shift is transformative. Your reflection with this episode is to consider whether this type of exposure may be right for you. Take into account the intensity of this method and whether you are ready to face anxiety head on. Your task, as with other exposure methods, is to write down the situations that can trigger your anxiety or avoidance and put them in order to create a hierarchy. With your therapist's help, determine a starting point and how best to implement this method of paradoxical intention. In addition, you can use the companion audio, Grounding Yourself When Anxiety Spikes, to assist you with this exposure method or other methods you might use. Let's end today with a brief mental rehearsal. Picture a moment when anxiety might show up. Not an overwhelming one, just something familiar. Maybe it's a tight feeling in your chest before a meeting, a racing thought when you're trying to sleep, or that flutter in your stomach when something feels uncertain. Or maybe a thought like, what if I embarrass myself? Now bring that moment gently to mind, not to judge it, but just to observe. Take a slow breath in, and as you exhale, imagine yourself turning toward that fear instead of away. Let the idea sit for a moment. What if instead of resisting the anxiety, I invite it in? Instead of fighting it, imagine yourself fully experiencing it. You say, okay, anxiety, come with me. You breathe, you allow the sensations, you observe the thoughts, and you remind yourself, I'm not afraid of you. The more you practice this, the more empowered you become. Not because you made the anxiety go away, but because you discovered that you didn't need it to go away in order to live your life. Until next time, keep practicing, keep breathing, and keep moving forward.